So I'm doing a tier list based on how good every class has been in Wild's history. This one is actually relatively easy to do, especially when you get to some of the better and worse classes. So let's start out there. Demon Hunter, of course, is a newer class compared to all of these ones in Wild. It didn't really have any decks in Wild for a long time until it united in Stormwind. I mean, it speaks for itself that it's only questline Demon Hunter. If you look at websites like Hearthstone decks, questline, quest. It's only questline Demon Hunter. It's the only deck that the entire class has, and it's an okay deck. It was actually quite good before Tony got nerfed, but Hogwaggle just simply isn't as good as Tony. It's 3 more mana. I think I have to put it in the C tier. It's just overall not been a great class in Wild. Death Knight, even newer than Demon Hunter. However, just as many playable decks. It's only even Death Knight. Here's an example list. You run triple Unholy, so you can use Grave Strength. It's the only deck that the class has in the format, and it's not even a good deck. There are multiple meta reports that have strictly said they only put it on because they want to have one deck per class, and it's just bad. So I believe Death Knight is arguably the only D tier class in Wild. Once you get past these two, every other class has had some very, very strong decks in the format. Druid, great example. Druid, easy S tier class. You had arguably one of the best decks ever in Twig Druid, where you would have Twig of the World Tree, Instrument Tech, and Sphere of Sapience before Twig was nerfed. And this deck is disgusting. Corvette hit rank 1 using it, and there's so many other decks that are just like this. Then you also have another tier 1 S tier Druid deck with Yogg Saron in Questline Druid, where before Rake and Yogg were both nerfed. Absurdly overpowered deck. This made one of the worst metas ever, where it was only only Questline Druid, and then only Miracle Rogue, and then everything else. Like, it was tier 1, one deck, tier 2, one deck, and then everything else. And it was very obvious that nothing else was playable at the time. This isn't a list from when it was at its best. I just couldn't find it. But Togwaggle Auctioneer Druid used to be even better than it is now. And it's still a good deck now. It's still actually a good playable deck now. But after nerfs to Auctioneer and just the meta evolving differently, mainly because of Funnel Cake, this deck is absurd. It's usually incredibly powerful. It doesn't really... Yeah, it can lose to aggro, but there's also just games where you just win on turn 3 anyway, and aggro can't play versus you, and it decimates every other combo deck, and it decimates every control deck. And then, most recently, you have Dragon Druid, Reno Druid, which has also been incredibly powerful. This Druid has had continual, like, tier 1 decks, even going further back than these last 2-3 years. Druid has been an insane class in Wild. You have Malagos Druid, even AK-47 Druid, which was also a S-tier deck that existed in the past, which is why Aviana got nerfed, used to exist as well, with Starliner. Just absurd class, easy S-tier for sure. Hunter is pretty bad in Wild. However, I have to put it in B tier because Hunter did have an S-tier deck at one point, and that was Odd Questline Hunter. Regular Questline Hunter was good, yes, but the odd version is what really made this deck pop off. Memnarch was able to hit rank 5. Memnarch's a pretty prominent community member. He works for Tempo Storm, does stuff like that. And even with this pretty suboptimal list, he runs Spellword Jeweler as a tech, and it just goes to show how incredibly powerful this deck was. The issue with the rest of Hunter is Hunter doesn't really have any other great decks throughout its history. So you can play Even Hunter, you can play Reno Hunter. They're just not good. They're just bad. But Beast Hunter is not. Beast Hunter is by far the second best deck Hunter has ever had in Wild. Maybe arguably Naga Hunter, Naga Giants Hunter, but we're not going to count that. Hunter's just not been a great class in Wild throughout its history. Beast Hunter is okay. It's usually like a tier 3 deck. I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's kind of bait, but I can't deny that it's probably tier 3 usually. It was tier 1 like 2 years ago at this point, but Hunter doesn't really have much to go for in Wild. Mage. Mage is, I'd say, about in the same spot as Hunter. I put it above because Quest Mage is really good. You had Mozaki Mage, you had Ignite Mage. Actually, I'd probably put Mage in 8th. No, I'll put Mage in B tier. I think that's more accurate towards the class, comparing it to other classes as well. Mage hasn't had any uber broken S tier decks that I can recall. It's had very good decks that are tier 1 for sure, but nothing that is so dominant over the meta like a lot of other classes. I think putting it in B tier is fair. Reno Quest Mage is currently incredibly good right now. Seeker Mage was good before it was killed. Nuked from orbit. And then you had Mozaki Ignite Mage as well. Like I'm saying, Seeker Mage used to be incredibly good. Being able to hit rank 4 with a deck like this is actually kind of insane. I'm not going to lie. This guy, really good player. It was before Costume Singer and Cabal Lackey both got nerfed. Ignite Mage before Sorcerer's Apprentice was nerfed was incredibly powerful deck. Arguably, actually, it's an S tier deck. Now that I think about it, I think it's pretty fair to call it that. Just so disgusting what this deck could do to you. Even if the list looks janky because it runs a bunch of tradable cards, it was still the best way to play it. So I think putting Mage in this B tier is probably accurate. Paladin as well, I'll put in the B tier. Paladin's had some pretty good decks over the years. Holy Wrath currently. Showdown was actually pretty good at the beginning of Showdown before the Prismatic Beam nerf. You still run those cards because they're powerful, but building the deck around it isn't as good. But the real one that you like to talk about is Mech Paladin, I believe. Yeah, Mech Paladin is incredibly good deck for, like, at the time, before Mech Warper was nerfed. There's like a million different lists that you could run for this deck, but it's just great deck. It's also a really good anti-meta deck. If like Kingsbane or Questline Druid are really good, this deck just utterly dunks on them. It's not even close because of Bubblebot. Excuse me, because of Bubblebot. This deck, very prolific. It's dead now. You know, Mech Warper costs 4 mana after it's unbanned, and it's probably unlikely we'll see Mech Paladin come back in a long time, but it's always a world. Priest. I think you have to put Priest just based on the fact that Priest has a banned card because the deck was so good. You have to put Priest in A tier alone. However, I'm still going to put Priest in S tier. Very strong class over time. You know, Raza Priest was at one point the best deck in the game. Miracle Priest is usually very good. Inner Fire Priest is usually very good. Big Priest, you know, at one point again was the best deck in the game. Shadow Priest, best aggro deck arguably ever in Wild. Especially right now, it's so good. It's so efficient. It has the best 1-mana minion ever printed in Void Touch Attendant. This is arguably one of the best cards ever made, just alone, Void Touch Attendant. And that's on top of running other incredibly powerful cards like Mind Blast, like Benedictus himself. So, yeah, of course Shadow Priest is easily one of the best decks ever. Then you have Reno Priest. This isn't the list from Reno Priest when it was at its peak. Usually when it's like that far back, it's kind of hard to find, but this is a more recent list of Reno Priest. Reno Priest at one point was the best deck in the game, right after Raza got reverted, actually. So there's that as well. I was looking for another Priest deck, actually, but you can see it right here, like how great Miracle Priest and Svalna Priest are as well. There was also Switcheroo Boar Priest, which would kill you on turn 3 or 4, usually. What you would do is you would play Switcheroo before it was banned and then subsequently nerfed. You would get Stone Tusk Boar and the Darkness. You would swap their stats. You'd have a 20/20 boar. Then you'd summon a copy of it with Vivid Nightmare. And it was really good. Of course, it became Swap Their Health. Sorry, not Swap Their Attack. And then you would have to top Starbie it. This deck was so disgusting that it got Switcheroo banned from Wild because they just couldn't even try to change it. I don't know. But yeah, Priest, I'd say it's an easy S tier class. It's been so good in Wild's history. It's had multiple S tier decks, multiple tier 1 decks. Yeah, there are times where Priest is bad, but like not really anymore. Shadow Priest being the best aggro deck ever. So yeah. Rogue also is an S tier class. You know, Rogue has had so many different combos. You have Pillager, you have Mine Rogue, you have Kingsbane, you have Pirate Rogue. It's just incredible. Miracle Rogue is one of the best decks in the game currently. I mean, look at this. Let's look at number 3. Great deck. Very, very strong. It was the second best deck in the game during, like, no contention during the Yogg meta. Of course, Pirate Rogue. It's been incredibly one of the best decks, like, in the format since Swordfish came out. This card's so broken. 3 mana, 4/3 weapon. Why did they print that? Mine Rogue has been great for a long time. It got incredibly better with Shadestone Skulker. It's able to kill your opponent on turn 3. You can OTK on turn 3 with this deck. You can deal 40 from hand. You can deal 40, like, incredible amounts of damage from hand. It's so disgusting. You even had Death Rattle Dragon Rogue, where you'd play Necreum Apothecary. You would draw your only Death Rattle, which is Deathling Dragon Lord. And then you would just cheat out a bunch of mana worth of dragons, and you'd win the game. Because it was pretty much impossible to deal with on turn 4. At that point, 3 or 4, you could do it. Disgusting deck. So I think putting Rogue in S tier is pretty fair. I actually think I'm going to move Mage up to A tier, because Mage is significantly far and ahead away over these two classes, especially because I'm going to be putting another class there, and I think it's more accurate. Warlock is the best class in Wild history ever. This brings us to the best deck in Wild history, Snip Snap Warlock. There is no contesting that this is the best deck in Wild history. It's so far and away was dominating over the game that it drove, like, I'm talking hundreds, possibly thousands of people to never play Wild again. This deck was absolutely disgusting. You would play Mech Warpers with Summoning Portal and Glinda Crowskin, make your Mech Warpers cost 0, make your Snip Snaps cost 0. You build a gigantic, impossible to clear board, and there's just nothing you could do about it. You would spend your entire turn APMing up like a board that was like an 80 health, 80 attack board. It was impossible to clear aside from like strict hard removal, and sometimes that wasn't even good enough, you know? It was disgusting. It needed to die. We're very happy it did. If you ever stuck a mech, like if you stuck Mecharoo, which isn't that easy to clear because it's, you know, it has the death rattle, you stuck Annoyatron, you stuck Gatekeeper, anything like that, you won the game the next turn because you would just send hundreds of damage into your opponent's face if you were fast enough. It was so utterly disgusting. It's easily the best deck ever in the game. Another S tier deck, Darkest Hour Warlock. You would play Darkest Hour with Blood Bloom on turn 3. You would cheat out all these gigantic minions like Yashara, Lich King, and the big demons that Warlock has access to. And like your opponent really couldn't do anything about it. Sorry, not turn 2. I'm thinking of the newer list. It would be turn 4, usually, maybe sometimes turn 3 on the coin. There was a newer list that you could do something janky with it. I don't know what I'm talking about. Anyway, it was just utterly disgusting deck. It made Bloodbloom get nerfed, which it deserved to be nerfed anyway as a card. Like, this card, functionality-wise, should not have been 2 mana, especially because this card. But it's such a disgusting deck. Then, of course, you have Darkglare Warlock, which has been nerfed twice. Originally, it was nerfed because it was the best deck in the game. And then, it was still the best deck in the game after they nerfed Darkglare to 2 mana, 2/3 with the same effect. Then they finally nerfed it back to 3 mana with the same effect, and it wasn't as good until another card came out, and then it was really broken again, but it's fine. Darkglare Warlock, again, an easy S tier deck, one of the best decks ever. So disgusting when it was at its full power of 3 mana refresh 2 mana crystals. Darkglare is the first card to ever be nerfed that was like a card in standard to be nerfed specifically for Wild. That's how overpowered this deck was. And of course, that card that really broke Darkglare again, I think it was actually in the list I showed for Darkglare. That was an accident. is the quest line. This card was so absurdly broken that it not only warped the entire Wild format, it warped the Standard format. And it was the first... actually, it's not the first, if I remember correctly. It's the second card to be banned from Wild, even though it should have been the first. For some reason, it didn't get banned. They eventually banned Stealer of Souls, which was, even more broken. But they should have banned this card first. Stealer of Souls, Warlock, again, also disgusting. It's basically Darkest Hour Warlock, but even better. So that says a lot. But yeah, there's this deck was so disgusting. It's still broken in Wild, even with, +6 health total to the quest that you need to do over 3 turns. It's such a broken card. Probably one of the worst design cards ever. I don't know what they're thinking. This deck also at the time had 3 mana Rune Mythal Rod and, Cataclysm pre-nerf. We are so lucky that Warlock got so many nerfs. We just so are. And last, but certainly not least, discard Warlock. I'm showing the most recent time discard Warlock was S tier, because it's been S tier like 4 times. I mean, 3 that I can think of currently, but, in the last year, the last 2 years, I should say, you had Tome Tampering questline Warlock, which was so broken, Tome Tampering got banned. You had Cataclysm questline Warlock, or Discard Warlock, sorry, not questline, which was so broken, Cataclysm got nerfed. And then you had, right before Caverns of Time, the set came out, you had the buffs from Caverns of Time, Discard Warlock, which was the best deck in the game. And then after Caverns of Time came out, you had the Chamber of Vasidius, 2 mana location before it got nerfed. And this is arguably the best card ever printed. Let's put it this way. If you got this card in Mulligan, you had a 90% chance to win the game. That's what the stats said. 90% chance to win the game if you had Chamber of Vasidius in your Mulligan. That is how broken this card was. There's no card ever that has been anywhere remotely that close to being as strong. And it's crazy that they let it go through like that. And it was like that for like a month before it got nerfed. It is probably the worst meta ever to exist in Wild, because usually all the other decks have like some form of weakness. Sometimes you just don't draw Simpsap in Simpsap Warlock, which sucks, and it did happen, right? Sometimes you just wouldn't draw it and you would lose the game, right? But in Discard Warlock, if you drew Chamber, you won. You just won the game. Soul Barrage is so ungodly fucking broken. This deck is so toxic for the game to exist. It's not even funny. I just spent forever talking about Warlock. Easily the best class in the format ever. Warrior. I'd say Warrior is probably an A tier alongside Mage. Warrior has had a very storied history in Wild. And that comes from, in the most recent years, Questline Warrior has been really good. Is this a standard list? Oh wow, I think it is. One second. I don't know why I thought that was a Wild list when I looked at it. Anyway, Questline Warrior, incredibly powerful deck. Swizzle, pretty known at the time. Wild player was able to take it to 33 with this list I found. Great deck. It was so dominant that in lower ranks of Hearthstone, just as a game, that they fucking dunked this deck from orbit, dude. They nerfed so many things about this deck. They nerfed Bloodsail Deckhand. They nerfed the questline itself. They nerfed Smite. They nerfed Pufferfist. I don't think Pufferfist is in this deck. Anyway, just insane fucking insane quest. I don't know how to describe it. If you weren't there playing against this, how dominant it was over the format, it was the best deck in the game for sure. I don't know how to describe it any better than that. You have had multiple different kinds of Skipper Warrior lists over the years. Most recently, because of Odin, you can finally play Odin Skipper Warrior and actually have a win condition, which is kind of been some of the issues with Warrior control decks. Skipper Warrior in the past used to mainly just gain a lot of armor and not really do much else. Gauntlet Warrior is also playable with Skipper, but it's just been very good. And then you had Even Warrior now that, Odin came out. This is an awful list. Who the fuck made this? Whatever. The list might suck, but Even Warrior is still a very strong deck. It was the third best deck during the Yogg meta because it was the only deck that could survive and actually deal with it. It's getting worse and worse over time because people realize that you can just do anything at all, and this deck is too slow to deal with it. But it's still a known deck. So I think putting Warrior in A tier for having a couple really, really strong decks throughout its history is pretty accurate to go alongside Mage, especially because, at the time, Questline Warrior was the best deck by far. Yeah. And then Shaman. I think you put Shaman in S tier as well. These aren't really ordered, to be fair, but Shaman definitely goes up here. I mean, where do I start? Aside from Even Shaman. Even Shaman is arguably the best or second best aggro deck in ever Wild in history, depending on who you ask. Yes, bots can play it, but the bots are actually so terrible at the deck that it doesn't even really describe the power level of the deck. Gumby, actually, see on his tweet, this guy's insane. If you don't follow him and learn how to play the deck through him, you're never going to play against the deck properly. You have Shutterwalk Shaman, which is a prolific, wild deck, but at one point during March of the Lich King, it was the best deck in the game, easily S tier. So fucking broken. It wasn't even funny. Due to the fact that Scargill existed, Thurgle was still 2 mana, but mainly off the power of Scargill Clownfish. You would just make a board, clear any aggro board, and then make a board too big at the same time for any control deck to deal with. And you'd also eat cards in their hand so that they would lose their combo pieces. So disgusting, this deck. Unnatural how it took so long to get nerfed. There was a time, I could not tell you the month or year, I just don't remember what it is, so I'm not going to look for it, where Big Shaman was the best deck in the game as well. It was incredibly, incredibly fucking broken. This is a more recent list from Doc Delight. He's the Big Shaman guy, of course. And we're probably going to see Big Shaman being the best deck in the game next expansion with the new location, so look forward to that, I guess. But Big Shaman's incredibly fucking good deck. It's been so good throughout Wild's history. And, I mean, you just can't really deny its power, especially because, as always, big minions are really fucking hard to clear on turn 4 and 5. They're just so hard to clear on those turns. Last, but certainly not least, you have Frog Shaman. So, Frog Shaman has been okay, pretty good over the years, but when Flash of Lightning came out, this deck with Bioluminescence at the same time was so disgusting. You could draw through your entire deck, OTK your opponent, and still have damage left over on turns, 4 and 5. Frog got nerfed, yes, but it's still a good deck. That's how good this deck is. Frog went from 3 to 5 mana, and it's still incredibly fucking good. You have players like Purrs, who are just mains of this deck that are just so good at it. And the things they do with this deck are just disgusting. It truly is one of the best decks ever to exist. Well, this is what I'm putting as my overall Wild tier list. There have been 5 classes that really do dominate this format, and then 4 classes that have had okay decks, and 2 classes that really haven't been able to do much. Wild is a pretty combo-centric format. It's not a control format. It's not an aggro format. You'll have a couple aggro decks that have been very good over the years, but there's so many more combo decks that have been really S tier. If you enjoy, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you think below. Do you think I'm wrong? Did I miss any super crazy decks? I definitely didn't miss definitely not for these 2, I can tell you that. But yeah, all right. Peace out.